Joe Schmidt's first Wallabies squad has been announced. There's 495 caps of experience. There's 7 debutants. There's only 7 players in the 23 that featured at the World Cup, and indeed only 4 that took the field against Portugal in their final game, where they won against Portugal at the St. Etienne, which was their home of their great defeat to Fiji. I'm Christy Doran. Joining me is my boss, the editor of the Raw website, Mr. Tony Harper, and we're going to run you through all the team news, both from the Wallabies. We're going to touch on the All Blacks, and we'll also just speak about Dan McKellar's pending announcement at the Waratahs. But Harps, let me bring you in. Good to see you.
Hey, Christy. Good to see you as well.
Team.
Happy memories of St. Etienne and chicken wings from Uber Eats and bottles of rosé as we poured over a Wallabies team. You know, hopefully this one doesn't end the way that did, in absolute fiasco, Bill. So, it's good to be back in Wallaby season.
It certainly is, and you can only see the reaction. Everything is being read. Tens of thousands of readers across the multiple stories over the last week, which have included Kurtley Beale's season-ending injury to Len Ikitau's hamstring niggle, to the decision to send guys like Ryan Smith home early and not invite them back for this second week of the Wallabies camp, which then went into Liam Wright, a brand new Wallabies captain. He will be the 7th in 10 matches, which is rather extraordinary. And all of that, including the team news, which we revealed first on the Raw website over the last 48 hours. There's a lot to sink our teeth in, isn't there?
There sure is. And that kind of points a bit to Joe Schmidt. He has said all along, I guess, that he felt that this wasn't something to be locked down on, that it's a work in progress. The naming of the least inexperienced captain since Ken Catchpole in 1961, who led the team on debut against Fiji. Liam Wright has played 5 matches for Australia. And fair enough, he's captain the state. I have this theory about why Joe likes him so much. And he kind of came to that a bit today when he said that the coaches like him because he doesn't say very much. And that's my sense as well. I don't know about you, but you watch Reds games and Stan throws a microphone under the guy's nose at the end of the match, and very little quotable comes out of him. And I thought, he and Joe Schmidt, they're a match made in heaven. They're deflectors, they're play down merchants. He's got the on-field version of himself there. I'm not sure how you kind of see it. Obviously, the guy's a great player, but in terms of inspirational leaders, he doesn't jump off the page to me. But how do you feel? Let's start with the captain then. Where do you feel, he's gone there? Why do you feel he's gone there?
I was having conversations with people at the start of the week around who this might be, who the captain. I think I even spoke to you on Sunday when you put together a bit of a candidate, who it might be. And correct me if I'm wrong, I think I even said, I think you should put Liam Wright in there. And you said, we're not going to go there. I don't think we're going to be including everyone there. Look.
I'll put my hand up for that. Well played. You've been on the money all week, with the team drops. I mean, you were so on the money, you were actually standing sideline when Kurtley Beale tore his Achilles, almost as if it had been pre-planned. It had the only photograph of that catastrophic event. So, whatever you're touching has come up diamonds this week, Seedy.
Well, anyway, back to Liam Wright. He's a really hard-working player. I first met him back in 2017. He was invited into a Wallabies camp by Michael Checker, who then gets taken as a development player on that spring tour. And he always had something about him, highly respected from a young age, very well spoken, softly spoken, and he hasn't changed one bit. I think he's the sort of guy that has gone through so much injuries after injury, setbacks. He was the heir apparent to guys like Michael Hooper and David Pocock once upon a time. And then another person comes along, Fraser McWright, pretty much got the same name, and he ends up taking his position, the number 7 jersey at the Reds. And he's kind of been living in the shadow a little bit his whole life. And here he is instantly in the spotlight I think it's a great story, testament to him. He's the sort of guy that when he's been injured, he's helped out with the coaches. He's the sort of guy that will get on the lawnmower at his club at East and just put the headphones on and mow the lawn. And I love those sorts of stories. He's really well respected by the playing group. He's not going to let you down. He's improved his dynamism with the ball carry, but he's effective over the ball. I don't know if it's a long-term option, and that's certainly the what Joe Schmidt was kind of getting across, that everything's short-term at the moment. He's still finding out a lot about this team, and whilst it's reasonably well balanced, 7 debutants is the most amount since 1980 when Australia took the field against Fiji and Suva. So a lot to unpick. It absolutely was a surprise that Liam Wright was picked ahead of guys like Alan Alatoa, who comes off the bench, and we'll come back to that. But I think it also has a bit to that decision is a little bit to do with Taniela Tupou, where his fitness is. Could he be called upon to play 60, 70 minutes if there was an injury early on to Alatoa? But we'll come to that in a second.
Yeah, Joe Schmidt did talk about weighing up the candidates based on who would start, selection of the team first, who would start, and then who would go deep into the game. And he's obviously identified that Liam Wright will go deep into the game. We had 6 captains in a year and under Eddie Jones. I mean, we might actually give that a record a nudge as well. He likes doing things in 7 with the 7 debutants and the 7 survivors. So maybe we aim for a magnificent 7 of leaders this year, Christy. But basically, I think the firm message is don't get too settled to the players. Don't get too settled to the media. Don't expect 23 players to run around all year. This is going to be a wide use of players in Super Rugby. He's going to take a look at them. There's obviously, it seems like a first squad that's picked already with next year in mind rather than too much of this year in mind, him giving himself a long lead into that. Do you think that's fair, or do you think that?
Well, there's 14 tests before next year's.
Yeah.
Well, there's 14 tests before next year's Lions series, and I still am sure and pretty confident that guys like Marika Korobetti and Will Skelton and Samu Karevi will still have a role to play for the Wallabies going forward. And although Joe Schmidt has made it crystal clear his preference, his strong preference is to pick from home, much like he did with Ireland, I think at some point the penny will drop. It's dropped for every other Wallabies coach. I would be surprised if it doesn't for Joe, that he needs some more strength, muscle, and world-class ability to be included and added. Look, the side that he's picked is actually probably the strongest possible team that he almost could have from the 38 that he initially chose and those that are left standing without injuries. It does still lack world-class quality about it. When Taniela Tupou is fit and firing, sure, he's world-class. Alan Alatoa is quality, very much an international prop. But you look across the board and it's really only maybe Rob Valentini who you can put into that same bracket at the moment. So there's a lot of players that are reasonable super players, whether or not they can make the big leap to test footy, international footy, where defenses are stronger, set pieces notoriously stronger. That remains to be seen. So I think he'll find out a lot in these 3 matches where, let's be honest, they should still win. Wales haven't won a game since the last match of the World Cup pool stage. 7 straight since their quarterfinal defeat. They've got a very inexperienced team. There's only, I think, 3 survivors across the starting 15 from the team that smashed the Wallabies 40 points to 6 in Lyon. They're 10th in the world rugby rankings. Australia somehow 9th, and they're going to be coming up against Georgia in 3 test time, who are outside the top 10. So these are still very much winnable tests.
I think winning obviously is important to Joe, and you're right, he's getting a bit of a free hit in terms of a weak Welsh side. But to me, it seems a lot about philosophy as well, and about getting that laid down nice and early. So in his press conference today, a few words jumped out to me about the team he'd selected, and that was talking about players with calmness, clarity, and how they can't afford to be too emotional. Again, something that kind of sums him up in his dealings, and an antidote to the Eddie wildness that we experienced and the chopping and changing and his outlandish warnings to the All Blacks to watch their backs. And, you're not going to get that. He said that the number of debutants was relevant, but really not pivotal. So he's playing that down as well. But most intriguingly, I think, to me, was his thoughts on cohesion and balance and how matching up players together. So how he felt that those players suited each other, not just in playing style, but also experience next to inexperience. If you look in the second row, for instance, where he's matched up an experienced hard campaigner with a new gun, in that sense as well. And I just felt there is some strategy here beyond just chucking the best players available out of the 38 onto the field. So it's good to hear that you think that he's actually come up with both. He's been able to hit some balance areas, but also hit some quality areas as well within the squad that he has.
Yeah, and James Slipper and Taniela Tupou, they started out careers, they know each other very well. You think about the Lukan Salakai-Loto, 39 caps experienced against a rookie in Jeremy Williams, who's much more agile, an ability to free his arms, beat the first man. That's really nicely balanced. We know the back row's balanced there. We know that in the midfield, you've got Hunter Paisami that's spent years alongside Josh Fluke, and of course Tom Wright and Andrew Kellaway have played often together. Dangunu on the left wing has spent years and years alongside guys like Paisami and Fluke as well, heading back to the Reds 1 year in between with the Rebels. And then even on the bench, you've got Alan Alatoa, who's nearly 60 matches of experience alongside a rookie in Isaac Kalia. So you're right there. The one, and Tom Liner, of course, with Tate McDermott, the Reds halves as well, with Dylan Peach, another debutant, the 15th Indigenous player to wear the number 23 position. The one person and the one selection surprise, I'd say, is Angus Blythe. Picked on the bench, 205 centimetres. He's had goatees, moustaches. He's occasionally had the odd headbutt. He sees that little bit of red mist occasionally. He's had all the tools, the physical attributes to be a player. And at 25, 26, he probably hasn't reached his potential yet. But I think the Wallabies new staff see something in him that others perhaps haven't seen or haven't been able to bring out the best in. And his selection over Nick Frost was quite telling, I think, because Frost has obviously got a lot of experience, but hasn't been at his best form throughout the year.
So Frost and Tom Hooper, probably the biggest, omissions, along with, let's say, Nick White. And you talk about contentious or selections that maybe were unexpected. I think for a lot of the raw readership, Jake Gordon at number 9 is, a big one, because Jake Gordon only a couple of months ago was trying to get out of his final times with Rugby Australia to go and play overseas. He kind of, I think it was assumed that he felt that his chances had come and gone for the Wallabies, and he's back there starting in a number 9 jersey. I wonder if Nick White's not quite a player that's a Joe Schmidt player, and whether that leads into it. Joe talked about, the advantages that Jake had with his kicking game, but also that he is the snappiest passer out of the 3 options that he had available to him. I know you think that that's not such a big shock based on super form, but it certainly is one that has divided our readership, right?
Oh, I think it's the sort of selection that, like, if a Richie Mwanga or a Beauden Barrett was picked at 10, I think it just divides states or divides islands. It's, if you're from Queensland, you probably don't like or rate Jake Gordon, or if you're from the Brumbies, you probably don't like either of them, and you're thinking, why isn't Nick White there? I think there is always a little bit of that sense. Jake Gordon is an interesting one because he started in a couple of Bledisloe matches in 2022, and of course it was a very controversial one, that one in Melbourne. and had a reasonable game. And all of a sudden, despite the fact that he starts in a couple of reasonable matches, the chopping and change continued on that spring tour, and he almost just fell down the pecking order right there and then. And we know that Isaac Fines-Leutler-Wasa was just plucked probably out of nowhere by Eddie Jones last year. So it probably surprised a few people in the sense that, well, he hasn't been in the Wallabies jersey for more than a year. I think he had a good year. I think he was overused and overplayed by Darren Coleman. I would have been looking to Teddy Wilson and to Jack Grant more, but that doesn't mean he didn't have a good season. We know the Waratahs' troubles up front. We know the troubles in the back room. And if it's not a happy camp, it's very easy to try to say that particular players haven't played well if they're not winning. But I think the reality is Jake Gordon did play well throughout the year. Noah Lolosio is another one that people kind of scratch their head out. Even today, there was a fellow journalist going, how many chances does he get? And I said, hang on a moment, he's 24. You know, he's a youngster. And Richie Mo'unga is barely playing for the All Blacks at 24, but yet there's still this idea that if you haven't succeeded by the time that you've had 15, 16, 17 games, that put a line through him. And I said, look, hang on a moment. His last game, he led the Wallabies to a great comeback victory in Cardiff in 2022 against the Wales off the bench with Ben Donaldson starting. So I think it's not necessarily, 14 tests is a bit of time, but it's not that long a time. And I think that if there's one area where I don't think Joe Schmidt will experiment too much, I would say it's at 9 and 10.
And yet he's brought in Tom Liner. He is a massive fan, though, isn't he? He talked again today about his courage and how he just always fronts up. This is a huge moment for Australian rugby in a way, right? Because it looked like, with Louis Liner going to Italy, and it looked like Tom might not be, he's even younger, of course, so plenty of time on his side. But like in terms of succession and what Michael did for the country, this is a huge moment for Tom Liner and Australian rugby to latch onto, I think, psychologically as well, post-Carter Gordon walking out of the game, having been brought in and, so many hopes resting with him. So, like, how do you feel Liner will embrace this from what you've seen of, his career so far?
Well, every interaction that I've had, and I've seen him twice in the last couple of weeks, he's been just what Tom Liner is, pretty cool, calm, and that's what Joe Schmidt seems to like. If there's one thing about Johnny Sexton, he was a pretty fiery customer, but he was always, particularly after his first few years with Leinster, composed. He knew his job, so focused on winning. And he just had a great skill set. And there's some similarities there with Tom Liner. And I think you actually do have to look at a Tom and go, there's characteristics and attributes that he shares with his old man. And if he turns out to be half the player of Michael Liner, the Wallabies in Australian rugby will be pretty happy, won't they? He's just turned 21, been very unflappable. You speak to guys like James O'Connor and they talk about how calm he is on the field. And that's just a characteristic that you can't really measure or quantify, is it? But he's got something about him. I think it is a bit of a surprise. Like, he's not necessarily he's not the flashy 10 like a Quade Cooper or the Kurtley Beals that have been experimented over the years. He's just a guy that's not necessarily going to break the line all that much, but he will challenge it. He'll generally kick his goals. And I think it's almost, he's a development player, I think almost in a 23. I think that's almost how they see him. So, yeah, it's a great name. It's a lovely story. Cynically, I wonder whether or not they thought, let's make sure we cap this guy because Italy are really keen to pull him up to Europe to play alongside his brother Louis, who's probably got the best winning percentage of any Italian player of all time, having started with consecutive victories up there in the north. So, he'll wear the 22 jersey. What else, is there anything else that took your eye about that, or do we just touch upon the All Blacks now? Maybe I just want to know prediction?
A scoreline prediction from you. I mean, I am horrible at these, as you well know. So, I came last in the raw tipping competition, and it was not even a close last. I'll tell you, Christy. I did kind of put myself out there a bit, and I don't think people really want my score prediction, but I'm going to tip Wales by 3 points. Well, it is the land of my fathers, after all.
Well, there you go. If you were to do that on the betting odds, you'd get a fair bit of money behind you. So maybe you back that one in. I still can't believe on some betting agencies $5.60 that they're paying, which I think is pretty outrageous since they've won 4 of their last 5 against the Wallabies, including at the last 2 World Cup campaigns. I think it'd be a tight affair. It might be a 20 points to 17 to Australia. We'll see whether or not the weather plays a part of it. It's cleared up in Sydney after looking horrid earlier in the week. So that'll be it'll be an absorbing game, and there's a fair bit at stake about changing a narrative in Australian rugby. Let's touch upon New Zealand just quickly. The All Blacks
before we do, before we do, I want to ask you that figure again for the Australian caps. Can you remember what that was?
495.
How many cap? 495. So the All Blacks caps, you want to have a guess?
I haven't added it up, but I would say
934.
Well, you didn't even give me the chance. I was going to say double. I was going to say double when you think about guys like Cody Taylor, Scott Barrett, Artie Sevilla, TJ Perenara. Welcome back, TJ. Damien McKenzie, Beauden Barrett off the bench. There's a fair bit going for them. Look, the controversial decision, and probably the biggest one, is at fullback, I'd say. Maybe at halfback with going back to the future with TJ Perenara at 9. But given that Cam Roygaard's injured and Aaron Smith's retired, I don't think it's as big as Stephen Perifetta in the number 15 jersey, Beauden Barrett on the bench. I like the fact that Beauden's not just welcome back. He hasn't played Super Rugby this year. Artie Sevilla, of course, does play at the number 8 off the back of spending a year in Japan. But it's 15 and Perifetta that's drawing some of the headlines across the ditch.
Yeah, I think you've nailed that there. There's only one debutant in the All Blacks, and that's Razor Robertson himself, as debuting as All Blacks coach. He had 5 in his squad, and he's decided maybe it's all about just making sure he's the only one who gets that debut kind of loving this week. But he's decided to go all in on experience for his first go against Steve Borthwick's England. So that was an interesting call. I thought maybe first test of the season they might have rolled out a young one or two.
The thing about Razor Ray, when he took over from Todd Blackadder at the Crusaders, he didn't completely do away with all the players. He changed the captaincy, but he upskilled players and they started playing better. And I think you'll see the same with the All Blacks. You don't have to throw away everything. When Eddie Jones came in to England in 2016, it was a very similar side to the one that Stuart Lancaster had built for 3-4 years. And Eddie at the time managed to sprinkle some dust. Unfortunately, he couldn't with the Wallabies last year. But I get the sense that Scott Robertson, he will be respectful for those that got to a World Cup final. Several of them still young enough to go the journey again. Cody Taylor at hooker, Asafa Umura off the bench. So some serious firepower there. Sammy Penny-Finau at 6. I actually love the back row, and I love Finau. I know that I questioned some of his actions throughout Super Rugby, but he's got a bit of Jerome Kiner about him. And Dalton Papali'i, brilliant 7, both sides of the ball. And then if you can bring in an Artie Sevilla at 8, blimey. Every game that's played under the roof in Dunedin, I think it brings the opposition, the visitors, into it. We've seen the Wallabies in 2017 get a match, lose it right at the end. And similarly in 2023 with a penalty goal to Richie Mwanga. I wonder whether or not England will probably feel, of the couple of games that they've got, this is their best chance, because it takes away some of the elements of playing in New Zealand. It's one of the smaller crowds. I'm looking forward to this. 5 o'clock on Saturday afternoon, Australian Eastern Standard Time. It's going to be a cracker.
Yeah, they made just 2 changes from the team that flogged Eddie Jones's Japan last week. Joe Marler back in the front row is one of those. So they've won a lot of plaudits for taking a strong team down there. It's been, obviously the end of their season. They've played the Six Nations, all their European and domestic football. So to go down there and to raise when New Zealand's really, they've had Super Rugby, not as many games involved in that, but just about to launch their test season. It's good to see. And I think I think that'll be an exciting one to watch as well. Up against the Wallaroos, however, on the weekend. So, and they named their squad again today with 4 uncapped players in there, rolling out for the Wallaroos against Fijiana, which is a double header out there at the Sydney Football Stadium, Allianz, where you will be walking to the ground with umbrella in hand. Have you got is it a Bunnings umbrella you fashion, or a golf one, or what's your go-to umbrella in Sydney these days?
This will make you laugh, and I'll tell you what, it's not of my own choosing, but it is in the house at the moment. I've got a Magellan umbrella, and it's not from Hamish McLennan, but my partner's father fitted out the offices back there in the day. But yes, no link there with Hamish. Yeah, a great opportunity to go see a double header. Eva Kapani back at tight head prop, Leigh Morgan at 9, a couple of the Waratahs best, but also I think they'll add a lot. I reckon the Wallaroos get their first win. Joe Yap was speaking today about the fact that they've worked a lot on their strength and conditioning. That was imperative of the Pack 4 where they were found out there. And also a really nice thing just to point to was that earlier in the week, both the Wallabies and the Wallaroos had dinner together down at East Club, an opportunity to bring the two teams together. First time since 2019 that's happened. So a really nice thing, sharing a bit of the love, bringing the two groups closer together. The Aussie 7 sides were named for the Olympics over the last 24 hours as well. No real shocks there. Obviously, it heavily reported about it that Mark Nwanganituasi and Corey Toole were going to be on the plane. The women definitely head there as gold medal favourites, or at the very least to make the gold medal match. And lastly, just want to touch on Dan McKellar, heavily linked to the Waratahs. We revealed it on Wednesday mid-morning. I think he'll be a great fit for the Waratahs, and I think that announcement could be Friday, if not Monday, to try to give it some clean air before the Wallabies match. So it would be the smart play if I was a media manager. But McKellar, a year away at Leicester, didn't leave English rugby with his stocks necessarily up, but I think it would have been a great learning experience for him. He's already hitting the phones wildly to try to get players, woo them to the Waratahs. They'll be a much stronger squad in the years to come, and having a proven operator who's been a head coach for a number of years will only help, I think, the New South Wales Waratahs.
Big question is, can he fill the bars around Moore Park, Christy? Can he get the people back there and getting on it and filling those seats down there, because it's looked a bit bleak, hasn't it?
Well, the only thing that will help is winning. You know, Darren Coleman, I thought, was great for a quote, gave it everything. Unfortunately, they didn't win enough. I think Dan McKellar will make the Waratahs win more. He'll prioritise the forward pack, and there's going to be a lot of pace and spark for the Waratahs backline next year. So whoever's wearing the number 10 jersey, be it Tane Edmund or Jack Bowen, you just do the Harry Plummer role, be understated, because you'll have some players around him. Hey, look, I reckon that's a good rapid-fire edition today of the Raw Rugby podcast. Enjoy the footy on Saturday. We're going to do an instant reaction following the game. So please, if you have any questions or want to shout out, let us know. Tweet us, get in the comment section on the raw.com.au. And if you can't get that, I'll be back with Matt Tamua early next week. But until then, thank you. Thank you, Harps.
Big weekend ahead. I can't wait. I love having the Wallabies back, let me tell you.
All right, on that really great fired up note, thanks. I'll refer you instead to Ben Podgy's yarn on the raw.com.au, an absolute cracker, and he'll make you feel a bit more fired up than Tony Harper's efforts there. Cool. Thanks very much. Cheers.